You think breakfast has always been cereal and toast? Think again. Your grandparents started their mornings with hearty dishes that have vanished from American tables, fuel for hard work and long days ahead. Let's dig into 2 hours of 60 vintage American breakfasts only your grandparents knew. I think the most intimate food experience for anyone from the South is easily just hominy grits. Like, these are definitely a Southern ride or die as far as breakfast is considered. Creamy, loaded with corn and customizable in about 1,000 different ways, there's a lot that hominy grits bring to the table that other dishes just don't seem to compare to. And that too on a budget. They're made from hominy, which is essentially just dried corn that's been treated with an alkaline solution and then grounded into coarse grits. And when cooked slowly with water, milk, and broth, they actually turn into this incredibly thick, fantastic porridge that's worth its weight in gold. What makes hominy grits really stand out is their sheer versatility, though. I mean, the possibilities are quite literally endless. You can go the savory route or the super sweet route, and all you have to do is just add a bit more of whatever spices, seasonings, and herbs you're working with. Hominy grits are so effective largely because they were a Native American creation. The tribes were making hominy a long time before any Europeans set foot on American soil, and they helped to popularize the tradition, which is how it turned into a go-to for Southern kitchens by the 19th century. Tomato juice and a toasted English muffin was the stripped-down breakfast of every vintage weight loss guide and old cookbook trying to keep mornings fast, efficient, and low-calorie. You would pour a glass of chilled tomato juice, toast an English muffin, maybe spread a little butter if the diet allowed, and that was breakfast. It was basic, practical, and done in under 10 minutes. Back then, this was advertised as a smart start to the day, simple, savory, and filling without much effort. Housewives, office workers, and even students were told this meal would keep you going without weighing you down. It showed up everywhere from hospital diet plans to homemaker magazines, quietly filling bellies long before protein shakes and pre-packed bars took over. The tomato juice gave a little bite, the English muffin brought warmth, and together they were enough to start the day when time and groceries were tight. It is one of those breakfasts nobody brags about now, but it quietly got families through busy mornings without all the bells and whistles. Buttermilk cornmeal. Griddle cakes carried the warmth of Southern kitchens into a decade eager to celebrate regional flavors with a wholesome twist. Whole grain cornmeal gave these cakes a gentle crunch and rich yellow hue, while tangy buttermilk kept the interior tender and moist. Cooked on a hot cast-iron griddle, they developed a lightly crisp edge that paired beautifully with a drizzle of warm maple syrup or a spoonful of fruit preserves. Many families found them heartier than traditional pancakes, offering natural fiber and a subtle nutty flavor that satisfied appetites well into the morning. Newspaper food sections highlighted the recipe as an ideal way to enjoy old-fashioned flavor while keeping an eye on modern nutrition, encouraging cooks to serve them with fresh berries instead of heavy butter. Weekend breakfasts often featured stacks of these golden cakes accompanied by a pot of strong coffee and lively conversation, proving that tradition and health could meet in one delicious meal without compromise. Salted herring with potatoes is a dish that is built entirely on contrast. The briny meets the bland, and strong undertones meet soft aftertastes. The herring itself is something that's preserved in brine, right? So it's deeply flavored. It's firm when it comes to the flesh, it's slightly oily, and that tang isn't for everyone. But an honest-to-God seafood lover is going to enjoy the life out of it. The dish itself is something that's most commonly served cold, slightly warmed, or just with a side of elegant mashed potatoes. As elegant as they can be when they're made by a frustrated mom who just wants to get the table set up, really. A bit of chopped onion, sour cream, and dill, and you'll be remembering your mom's cooking soon enough. You know, salted herring with potatoes has always been something that's deeply considered a working-class regular, especially in the American Midwest and Northeast. It was so common to see this in coastal communities where fresh fish were always abundant. Preservation was something even kids could tell you about. Salted herring let families eat protein year-round, and potatoes were cheap and easy to grow, and they could be made into 1,000 different things. Butter was a luxury, margarine was suspicious, but bacon grease? That was breakfast gold. If you had a metal canister on the stove filled with congealed fat and a strainer on top, you already know where this is going. Toast with bacon drippings was a rite of passage. Crispy white bread smeared with yesterday's leftover lard, sometimes sprinkled with salt, sometimes just eaten as is. It was smoky, greasy, and completely satisfying. And back then, no one cared about saturated fats or cholesterol levels. The grease was recycled like liquid currency. Families kept it in old coffee tins or jelly jars, and if you ever scooped a thick glob of solid bacon fat onto toast and watched it melt into the bread like butter from another planet, then yes, you might be old. This was fuel for a long day, and it came with that unmistakable aroma that clung to your clothes long after the plate was clean. You did not waste anything. That was the rule. If you had bacon, you kept the grease. If you had grease, you made toast. And if you were really lucky, you had something even fancier waiting in the freezer. It came in a yellow box, and all you had to do was Lego. Buckwheat porridge is a dish that screams warm and umami. It has a very nutty backbone, and it has an incredibly rustic flavor profile. If you cook this slowly, the buckwheat groats start to absorb water and the milk. The end result is this ultra-divine, thick porridge that's really filling, deeply satisfying, and just what you need after a hard day of work. Its texture is something that's a lot coarser than oatmeal, it's a lot chewier, it's more toothsome, and it has a rich and bitter flavor that makes it stand out from softer kinds of breakfast grains. Unsweetened, it's a bit less robust. It leans towards savory more than it does to anything complex, flavor-wise. Sweeten it with molasses, honey, or brown sugar, though, and you get an entirely different picture. Vividly smoky, deeply sweet, and just the right kind of warm, it becomes this ideal comfort food that restores your spirit and gets you ready for your day. Buckwheat porridge has always been something people have used like that, to just get themselves on their feet when they don't feel like making anything else, and I think it's time to bring the tradition back for all grain enthusiasts. Apricot almond granola bars signaled the arrival of homemade granola into American kitchens during the 1960s, when health food culture began to flourish. Rolled oats were mixed with chopped dried apricots, sliced almonds, and a drizzle of honey, then baked until golden and slightly crisp, filling the kitchen with a warm, nutty aroma. These bars provided natural sweetness, plant-based protein, and satisfying crunch, making them a perfect grab-and-go breakfast for busy mornings or after-school snacks. Unlike store-bought cereals, they allowed full control over ingredients, appealing to families seeking cleaner eating without added preservatives. Many home cooks experimented with different dried fruits such as figs or raisins, and even added a pinch of cinnamon or nutmeg for extra flavor. Wrapped individually, these bars traveled well in lunchboxes and picnic baskets, becoming a practical and tasty staple. Apricot almond granola bars captured the optimistic experimentation of the decade, turning wholesome pantry items into a portable breakfast that felt both rustic and delightfully modern. Cottage cheese on toast with pineapple rings was the kind of retro breakfast you would find tucked inside those glossy 1970s women's magazines, always advertised as light, quick, and just fancy enough to feel like you tried. You would toast a slice of bread, scoop on some cottage cheese, and crown the whole thing with a pineapple ring straight from the can. It sounds odd now, but back then it was practical, filling, and passed off as health food. Sweet, salty, creamy, and done in under 10 minutes. Perfect for busy mornings or when groceries were running low. Housewives loved it for its simplicity, and teenagers liked it for being something different than plain old toast. You could find versions of this popping up at brunch tables, church socials, or just in quiet kitchens trying to stretch a meal. Somewhere along the way, it disappeared under the weight of new diet trends and breakfast bars, but at the time, it was a fast, no-fuss meal that worked. Boiled barley porridge is one of those breakfasts that just feels like a pat on the back from a mentor, a hug from your best friend, or a call from your grandparents asking you to come over and try some of that breakfast you always love. It's also something that's built to last you at least until the middle of the day. You make boiled barley porridge by simmering hulled or pearl barley into water and milk, and then you get a soft, creamy texture that almost melts in your mouth. Flavor-wise, though, it's pretty nutty and kind of similar to oatmeal. You get a chewer bite and a bit more earthiness out of this, but it soaks up almost any kind of syrup or liquid you throw at it, as well as spices. That's a big part of why this dish is as flavorful as it is. We're talking about some serious ancient history when we discuss its origins, though, like this is the kind of thing that goes way further back, to the times of the Romans and medieval peasants. In the United States, it's something that was popular first in rural areas and immigrant homes, but each country has its own history with barley. Date nut bread. Slices with cream cheese combined natural sweetness with satisfying texture, earning a beloved spot on 1960s breakfast tables from coast to coast. This quick bread was made with chopped dates for gentle caramel notes and crunchy walnuts for heartiness, baked into a loaf that filled kitchens with a warm, toasty aroma. Once cooled, thick slices were spread with a generous layer of smooth cream cheese, creating a balance of earthy nuts, sweet fruit, and creamy tang that felt indulgent yet wholesome. It was especially popular for school mornings when parents wanted a filling option that traveled well in lunchboxes or could be enjoyed on the way to work. Community recipe books often highlighted it as a clever way to use pantry staples, and many cooks swapped in whole wheat flour to boost the nutritional value even further. Whether toasted lightly or served plain, date nut bread slices with cream cheese provided fiber, protein, and a comforting taste of home that perfectly suited the optimistic, health-conscious spirit of the decade. Canned peach halves with cottage cheese was the quiet, no-cook breakfast that kept dieters, seniors, and busy families fed when time and groceries were both running low. You would grab a can of peach halves, spoon some cottage cheese in the center, and breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. Sweet, creamy, and filling enough to count, it showed up in weight loss guides, homemaker magazines, and community cookbooks promising simple, affordable meals. Parents loved it because it was fast and required no stove, and older folks leaned on it when cooking felt like too much work. It might sound odd now, but back then, canned fruit and cottage cheese were pantry staples that stretched far and kept mornings moving. Some versions added a drizzle of honey or chopped nuts, but most kept it plain, quick, and practical. It is one of those breakfasts that slipped away as frozen meals and grab-and-go options took over, but back then, it was quietly keeping families fed with nothing but a can opener and a spoon. Mutton sausages are these super earthy, super robust, and unapologetically meaty dishes that offer an entire world of flavor for those willing to traverse its savory depths. They're grounded until they are extremely coarse, and the chew is something that lets you know you're eating something with a lot of flavor in it. Speaking of flavor, this is something that strikes a lot of unique notes. It's grassy, a bit gamey, and extremely savory, but it's seasoned in a very different way. You have blends of parsley, garlic, pepperjack, allspice, even nutmeg in there. People would also make really traditional blends with things like rosemary, black pepper, garlic, and a bit of vinegar. When you would cook these, the fat would slowly render out, and this would baste the meat internally, making it an incredible flavor festival for meat lovers. Leftover liver and onions for breakfast is the kind of thing that instantly tells you what generation someone is from. To many, it sounds like a punishment. To others, it was normal. Liver was cheap, nutritious, and widely available. Three things that mattered way more than taste. It came sliced, fried, and smothered in onions to soften both the texture and the blow. You might have had it for dinner the night before, and if there were leftovers, guess what was reheated in the skillet first thing in the morning? The smell alone was enough to clear a room. Metallic, meaty, and unmistakably intense. But it stuck to your ribs, and that was what mattered. Especially for working-class families or folks still shaking off Depression-era habits, liver and onions represented a kind of no-nonsense nourishment. And if you doused it in Worcestershire sauce or ate it with toast, you could almost convince yourself it was good. Almost. But if you ever woke up to that smell and thought, oh good, there's some left, then yes, you might be old. And if your breakfast was not liver, it might have come from the cold side of the fridge, swimming in syrupy nostalgia. The classic simple snack plate consists of salty, greasy, and unpretentious sardines and crackers. With just a little pressure, the soft, flaky sardines, which can be packed in oil, mustard, tomato sauce, or even fiery chilies, will surrender. They have a strong marine flavor that is more akin to a preserved richness that has been mellowed by time and oil than it is to fresh fish. Crackers provide the sardines the crunch and blandness they need to counterbalance their aggressiveness. The combination is still modest and incredibly fulfilling, even with the addition of a dollop of mustard, a splash of spicy sauce, or even a few thin slices of onion. This pairing was a classic lunchbox or supper standby throughout the 20th century, especially during the Great Depression, wartime rationing, and the working-class boom of the 1950s. Sardines were shelf-stable, high in protein, and inexpensive, making them a go-to for mill workers, fishermen, factory hands, and anyone needing a quick, filling bite. Served with saltines or butter crackers, they required no cooking, no refrigeration, and no fuss. Some folks even kept a can in their coat pocket for lunch on the job. Some of the most popular brands of sardines back then were Beechcliff, Brunswick, and Underwood. And some of these are still putting out the same sardines today. If you want to really stick to the recipe, there's no better time to do it than now. Carrot raisin. Morning loaf became a beloved quick bread of the 1960s as families searched for ways to add vegetables into everyday meals without sacrificing sweetness or comfort. Grated carrots gave the loaf a vibrant orange color and moist texture, while plump raisins provided natural bursts of sugary flavor that needed little extra sweetener. Whole wheat flour or a blend of flours added fiber and a hearty crumb, and warm spices like cinnamon and nutmeg filled kitchens with a cozy aroma as the loaf baked. Mothers loved how this bread delivered beta-carotene and vitamins in a form children eagerly devoured, often serving it lightly toasted with a thin spread of butter or cream cheese. Weekend brunches and after-school snacks alike benefited from slices of this cheerful loaf, which stayed tender for days and traveled well in lunchboxes. Carrot raisin morning loaf demonstrated the era's inventive approach to wholesome baking, turning simple pantry staples into a bright, nourishing treat that pleased everyone at the table. Cinnamon toast with broiler crisp was one of those forgotten 10-minute breakfasts that once felt fancy, even though it came straight from the bread box. You would take a slice of white bread, butter it generously, sprinkle it with sugar and cinnamon, and slide it under the broiler until the top bubbled and crisped. That was it. No pancake mix, no waffle irons, just the broiler and a little patience. Kids loved it because it felt like dessert. Parents loved it because it was fast, and everyone loved it because it used pantry staples. During the Great Depression and even into the 70s, families relied on simple breakfasts like this to stretch groceries without giving up flavor. The sugar caramelized on top, the bread toasted just enough, and suddenly plain breakfast felt like a treat. You could find versions of it in old community cookbooks, school recipe cards, even homemaker magazines. Somewhere along the way, it disappeared under the weight of frozen waffles and cereal boxes. Vinegar pie for breakfast is something that really just doesn't even sound like a real meal. It honestly sounds like some kind of prank, but no. This is a very real dish, and it actually works in more ways than one. For starters, this doesn't really taste the way you think it would. I know you're imagining some really bitter, acidic notes from the vinegar, but the initial flavor beats are sweet tart, and they give off a very custardy vibe. It's a bit like a lemon chess pie, but just made with your typical pantry staples instead this time. The vinegar is the star of the show, as it should be, and it cuts through almost every other flavor present in the pie, but not to the point where you would think all you can taste here is just vinegar. It's rich. It has this tangy brightness that actually is very stimulating for your taste buds, and if you pair it up with some hot coffee, then it works as well as Bruno Mars does with Anderson .Paak. Vinegar pie is something that strangely, despite being a pretty innovative and flavorful hit, is something that would be called a desperation pie because it's something that was made mostly by the women of the South and the Midwest living in rural populations. Crispy rice cereal with sliced banana and evaporated milk was one of those fast, forgotten breakfasts straight out of government-issued recipe guides and frugal homemaker magazines from decades past. You would pour a bowl of crispy rice cereal, slice a banana over the top, and finish it with canned evaporated milk instead of fresh milk. Breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. Ready before the school bus pulled up or the factory whistle blew, it was practical, affordable, and quietly comforting in its own way. Families leaned on breakfasts like this when groceries ran tight, but everyone still needed something filling to start the day. Evaporated milk was shelf-stable, bananas stretched a meal, and cereal brought the crunch. You will not find this version on menus today, but back then it was one of those small tricks that kept mornings moving without much fuss. Somehow, even the humblest breakfasts had a way of sticking with you, until they disappeared. Vegetable juice cocktails offered a vibrant start to the day for families who embraced the fresh juicing craze of the 1960s. Homemade blends of carrots, celery, tomatoes, and leafy greens were touted as energizing tonics that delivered vitamins and minerals in every sip. Enthusiastic homemakers and health enthusiasts alike used sturdy kitchen juicers to create bright orange and green drinks that promised natural vitality and a refreshing lift before work or school. Nutrition columns in popular magazines highlighted these colorful cocktails as a way to boost immunity and cleanse the system, a concept that resonated with a generation seeking balance between modern convenience and natural living. Some households added a pinch of cayenne pepper or a splash of lemon juice to sharpen the flavor, while others preferred a milder blend for children. Served chilled in tall glasses with a sprig of parsley for garnish, vegetable juice cocktails became a stylish morning ritual that reflected the optimistic belief that good health could indeed be poured straight from the garden. A warm, unassuming bowl of grainy goodness, cracked wheat cereal evokes the flavor of Chili Farm mornings. A thick, slightly chewy cereal with a nutty, toasted flavor is created by cooking coarsely ground wheat kernels, also known as bulgur or wheat farina, in water or milk. It has a rustic tang that lets you know this was once a whole grain that was plucked from the ground, and it's heartier than cream of wheat and less sweet than muesli. Simple toppings like a pat of butter, a tablespoon of brown sugar or molasses, and perhaps a dash of milk turn it from bland to comfortable without taking away from its healthy qualities. Besides being something that's entirely perfect for getting your gains in a healthy way, it's a dish that really just takes you for a spin when you eat it regularly. Suddenly your skin's doing better, you're putting on some muscle, you've probably never felt this fresh in a long while. It's a dish that's abundant with goodness, and that's a big part of why people would cling onto it as a reliable breakfast. Sardines on toast, that is it. That was the breakfast. A few oily, salty fish laid out over a slice of dry toast, sometimes with mustard, sometimes with nothing at all. This was peak efficiency. Sardines came in little tins with pull tabs and olive oil, and once opened, there was no going back. You either learned to love them, or you left the room. But in many households, especially immigrant or coastal communities, sardines were normal. They were rich in protein, did not require refrigeration, and could be eaten cold. They slid out of the can like they were daring you to try them, and once you did, you either never looked back or never forgave your parents. The smell alone would hang in the kitchen like a stubborn ghost, and yet somehow they kept showing up on toast. Bonus points if you smashed them onto toast with a fork and added some black pepper or a squeeze of lemon. That was the deluxe version. For others, it was just fish and bread, plain and honest. Kids would gag. Grandparents would smile. And somewhere in the middle, someone would quietly eat their sardines and be grateful they were not powdered eggs again. It was not about flavor. It was about function. And if that sound of the tin peeling open still triggers memories, you know exactly what kind of breakfast we are talking about. But not every vintage morning started with toast and fish. Some of them started with hot soda, literally. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is really just make a bowl of cracked wheat cereal. Fatback and grits is pretty much something you would always identify as Southern comfort food. It's just something that's always been so heavily associated with the South, and that's for a good reason. Southern restaurants, families, churches, charity organizations, and a lot more have relied on this because it's just that good at what it does. You get an extremely soul-sustaining dish that's very popular in the rural South, and in farming communities, it's a gold mine. This is something that's also considered treasure among sharecroppers. But really, why is everyone putting all their stocks into this? Well, fatback was just an inexpensive and convenient way to preserve pork. And I mean seriously preserve it. Something that was this valuable of a protein source needed to go all the extra miles it could, and the people of America were all about making it last as long as possible. Grits would be made from ground hominy corn, and a lot of farmsteads and rural communities back then had their own practices of growing corn derived from Native American techniques and farming methods. Nowadays, fatback and grits just isn't something you see much in America anymore. But if you go for rustic, vintage Southern joints, you can find some authentic recipes. Most restaurants serve refined versions of this old classic now, though. So keep that in mind if you're looking to vlog a very faithful rendition of this dish. Baked apples with raisin filling turned an everyday fruit into a naturally sweet breakfast treat that fit perfectly with the growing interest in wholesome desserts during the 1960s. Large, firm apples were cored and stuffed with a mixture of plump raisins, chopped walnuts, and a sprinkle of cinnamon before being baked until tender and fragrant. The gentle heat released the apple's natural sugars, creating a warm syrup inside each fruit without the need for refined sweeteners. Families appreciated the simplicity of a dish that required little more than pantry staples, yet delivered comfort and nutrition in every bite. Some cooks added a splash of fresh orange juice to brighten the flavors, or a dollop of plain yogurt on the side for extra creaminess. Served straight from the oven on cool mornings, baked apples with raisin filling offered a satisfying balance of fiber, fruit, and subtle spice, proving that a breakfast could be both indulgent and healthful. This dish embodied the era's love for natural ingredients and the quiet joy of a homemade morning meal. Quick cornmeal. Mush was one of those Depression-era breakfasts that showed up in every rural cookbook and farmhouse kitchen when groceries ran low, but mornings still demanded something hot and filling. You would stir cornmeal into boiling water, cook it down to a thick, creamy consistency, and top it with butter, syrup, or even just a pinch of salt. Breakfast was done in 10 minutes flat, and somehow it stuck with you for hours. Families loved it because cornmeal was cheap, easy to store, and stretched into a satisfying meal without much effort. Some folks called it polenta, others called it mush, but it always worked the same: practical, no fuss, and surprisingly comforting. It filled bellies through winters, long work days, and school mornings when cereal was not an option. You could find versions of this recipe in old homemaker magazines, church fundraisers, and even government pamphlets reminding families how to get by with less. It is one of those breakfasts that quietly disappeared, replaced by boxed mixes and quick-fix meals. But back then, it kept people going. Boiled wheat berries and sugar syrup porridge is something that's the kind of breakfast that just transports you through time. It takes you back to a world where everything is made from scratch. There's no back of the label you have to read, and the phrase "pre-packaged" isn't something your kids know yet. Nothing went to waste, everything was fresh. It was what Cartoon Network made you think the world was going to be like. Or those Disney and Ghibli movies. Just anything with a hint of soul, you know? The wheat berries were really exquisite too. The ideal thing for putting somebody in a food coma. Flavor-wise, this is as rustic and comforting as it gets. The wheat berries have a very nutty aroma to them, an incredibly chewy texture, and the syrup is something that gives a very nice sweetness. It makes the dish feel like a wonderful treat without really doing too much, and the syrup is something that really adds to that. It's one of those breakfasts that really makes a cold morning into a scene ripped right out of some indie film. The porridge was something that peaked in popularity throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, and that was especially true for rural households where wheat was very cheap and accessible. Today, it's a nostalgic recipe you find in ancient cookbooks, but it's worth making. Quick cheese grits with fried egg was the Southern shortcut breakfast that filled diners and home kitchens when mornings were short, but you still needed something hot and hearty. You would cook instant grits, stir in shredded cheese, fry an egg on the side, and layer it all in a bowl. Breakfast was done in under 10 minutes, but somehow it stuck with you all morning long. Families loved it because grits stretched far, eggs were easy to get, and a little cheese turned the whole thing creamy and filling. Southern diners kept it on the menu for quick weekday breakfasts, But this one lived quietly in home kitchens too. Practical, simple, and comforting. You could find versions of it scribbled in old cookbooks, tucked between biscuit recipes and gravy tricks, passed down by folks who knew how to make breakfast work without much fuss. Somewhere along the way, cheese grits and eggs faded under the pressure of new trends. But back then, this breakfast quietly carried people through long days. Egg white soufflé cups captured the fascination with airy, low-fat creations that defined many health trends of the 1960s. Beaten egg whites were carefully folded with a small amount of cottage cheese or finely grated vegetables, then spooned into individual ramekins and baked until puffed and golden on top while remaining cloud-soft inside. This technique required patience and a steady hand, but rewarded cooks with a striking presentation that felt both luxurious and virtuous. Diet magazines promoted the recipe as a clever way to enjoy a protein-rich breakfast without the heaviness of yolks or rich cream sauces, and many home entertainers used it to impress guests at weekend brunches. The delicate texture and mild flavor invited experimentation with herbs such as chives, dill, or tarragon, letting each cook leave a personal signature on the dish. Egg white soufflé cups stood as a symbol of mid-century optimism, blending elegance and health consciousness in a single airy bite that seemed almost too pretty to eat, yet remained nourishing and satisfying. Now, meat bone broth soup is a slow-simmered dish that most people think is deeply nourishing. When you walk into a kitchen that has this cooking, you start to immediately think that you're in the factory where pain relief medication is made. I mean, it doesn't smell like anything good. This is definitely one of those dishes where you have to trust the process, though, because you're in for a wild transformation. The magic of this recipe starts with the bones: beef, pork, or chicken, ideally with some scraps of meat still left on there, simmered for hours. If you want to get truly authentic and traditional, then you should simmer them for a few days. Yes, a few days. People actually did that with continuous fires. They also added a lot of onions, garlic, herbs, root vegetables, and whatever else they could find. The idea was that as it would cook, the marrow, collagen, and flavor would all dissolve and melt into the broth, making this super silky texture that just immediately feels amazing on the tongue. It feels a lot more like food than it feels like a broth, soup, or a drink, by the way. As far as the final flavor goes, it's deeply meaty, very subtly sweet, and it has a lot of herbaceous notes depending on the kinds of seasoning you use. Despite what you might think, the minerality from the bones isn't actually too strong. That's what all that intensive simmering is for. Bone broth is actually making a bit of a comeback today, but the rustic version we're discussing here is something that's just stuck to the pages of cookbooks now instead of the corners of our mind. Ovaltine was for people who wanted hot cocoa, but wound up with vitamins instead. You would scoop the brown powder into a mug, add hot water or milk, and stir, and stir, and stir some more, because it never truly dissolved. You would sip it and still find clumps floating at the top. The taste? Malted, vaguely chocolatey, with a lingering aftertaste of health. But Ovaltine was not just about flavor. It was about promises. The box claimed to make you stronger, smarter, and healthier, all while giving off the vibe of a prescription from your grandma. It was especially popular during the 1940s through the 1960s, when anything that could be fortified with vitamins was instantly approved by parents. And if you were sick, forget it. Ovaltine was coming your way whether you wanted it or not. It was like the soup of the breakfast world, supposedly comforting, vaguely medicinal, and always a little too warm. Kids would pretend to enjoy it, stirring it until the top got cold and the bottom got gritty. And if you ever drank it through a striped straw just to distract yourself, congratulations, you are in the club. But for some families, breakfast was even stranger. It came straight from a can and always smelled like regret. Bacon fat griddle cakes are something that are pretty much just pure, smoky nostalgia. They're the right kind of greasy. They're visually stunning, and they're full of so much flavor that you'll wonder why people stopped making these in the first place. The best part? They're so good to make on a budget. All that's required for this recipe is some flour, milk, eggs, and just a tad bit of cornmeal, sugar, and maybe molasses if you're really feeling like a dessert king. You're going to have got really old school with the griddle. You take leftover bacon grease instead of any butter or oil, and once your cake's shape is completely done, you just slap them on the griddle. What you get for all your hard, strenuous work is a very crispy-edged, savory and sweet pancake that has a lot of smokiness to it. Each bite feels like a crunch, but the exterior is what's really worth talking about. Obviously, you'd expect something like this to have a fluffy inside, but the exterior is just the perfect start to a delicious bite. Buckwheat blueberry waffles brought a hearty, rustic charm to the 1960s breakfast table when families wanted something more wholesome than ordinary white flour waffles. Buckwheat flour offered a nutty depth of flavor and a natural source of fiber, creating a batter that cooked into crisp, tender squares ready to catch pools of warm maple syrup. Juicy blueberries folded into the mix burst as they cooked, releasing bright sweetness and staining the golden batter with streaks of purple that delighted children and adults alike. Many homemakers liked that buckwheat provided essential minerals and a satisfying, earthy taste that paired beautifully with honey or a dollop of fresh whipped cream. Weekend mornings often featured these waffles served with hot coffee or fresh orange juice, while health-conscious parents felt proud to present a breakfast that balanced indulgence and nutrition. Buckwheat blueberry waffles showed how traditional grains could shine in modern kitchens, proving that healthy eating could still feel like a special occasion worth savoring together. Baked bean toast was the quick, savory breakfast that filled countless plates across New England when mornings were rushed, but you still needed something hot and satisfying. You would toast a slice of bread, spoon on canned baked beans, maybe top it with cheese or butter, and slide it under the broiler. Breakfast was done in under 10 minutes, hearty enough to carry you through a long day. Families loved it because it was affordable, practical, and good enough to stretch one can of beans into a meal for the whole house. Old cookbooks, factory lunch guides, and frugal homemaker magazines all praised this trick for making mornings easy without giving up flavor. Some folks added mustard or hot sauce, others kept it plain, but either way, it was the kind of breakfast that quietly filled bellies when nothing else seemed to last. These days, it barely gets a mention, but back then, baked bean toast was one of those small comforts that made hard mornings feel bearable. Hot water fried cornmeal cakes are an old-school Southern staple that don't really get even half the love and attention they should these days. I just want you to visualize a crispy, golden brown cornmeal cake with the most incandescent exterior you've ever seen, and then a tender, soft center that just leaves you wanting more and more. But it's natural, and even good, to get curious. And when you hear hot water fried anything, your first instinct is to immediately go like, wait, what? And I really wouldn't blame you. The practice of making cornmeal cakes this way is something that actually goes back several centuries, right back to the enslaved African Americans in the South who were making the first versions of these. Without access to proper feed, not even leavening, they found a way to make do with just cornmeal and water, and these were also known by a much more popular name, hoe cakes. Now, in the end, they started to fall out of everyone's go-to cooking preferences, but I think cornmeal cakes have one more comeback in them, despite it all. Oatmeal with brown sugar and cream was about as classic as breakfast could get. Quick oats simmered on the stove, topped with a spoonful of brown sugar and a splash of canned milk. It was ready in 10 minutes flat, cheap to make, and warm enough to shake off the worst winter mornings. Families across America leaned on this breakfast when budgets were tight, but everyone still needed something filling to start the day. Quick oats cooked faster than traditional oats, brown sugar gave just enough sweetness, and canned milk made the whole thing creamy even if fresh milk was hard to come by. It showed up in school lunch guides, frugal homemaker magazines, and those old cookbooks buried at the back of every kitchen drawer. For a lot of folks, this was not a special occasion breakfast. It was the daily routine, quiet, dependable, and gone in under 10 minutes. Funny how something so ordinary could disappear so completely, replaced by instant packets and flashy coffee shop menus. Peanut butter and apple. Open-faced sandwiches delivered a satisfying blend of protein, natural sweetness, and crunch, making them an ideal school morning breakfast in the 1960s. Thick slices of whole grain bread were toasted lightly, spread with creamy peanut butter, and topped with crisp apple slices for a refreshing contrast of textures. Parents loved how this simple combination kept children full and energized through long school days while also providing vitamins and minerals without relying on sugary spreads. Magazines promoted it as a smart choice for busy families, and many households customized it with a drizzle of honey or a sprinkle of cinnamon for a cozy touch. The sandwich could be assembled in minutes, yet looked appealing enough to serve at casual brunches with friends, reflecting the era's appreciation for healthy convenience. Peanut butter and apple. Open-faced sandwiches captured the straightforward creativity of 1960s breakfasts, proving that a few wholesome ingredients could come together to create a meal that felt both comforting and forward-thinking every single morning. Mutton fat bread is something that's unapologetically itself. It's too rich, too deep, and it has all the meaty flavors you could ask for. The essence of rendered sheep fat is unmistakable here. It's something that goes perfectly well with day-old bread, slightly dry, a bit hard, and coarse. You know, the entire 9 yards. This is as rustic of a dish as it gets. It absorbs the hot fat in this dish and it crisps on the outside while getting extremely soft on the inside. This dish is something that you would see really commonly whenever you would pass by factory towns or farms, especially among rural laborers, such as people in the 19th and 20th centuries. They were sheep farming regions like the Appalachia, Wales, or the Highlands, and mutton fat was an extremely common ingredient in these areas. That's because it was always far more cheaper than butter, or just a lot more flavorful than lard. The ideal material for frying. The fried bread was also a good way for people to stretch meals, and although some people didn't vibe with the overly gamey taste, back then it was considered a standard of most red meat-based meals. Tang was not just a drink, it was a vibe. A wildly artificial, suspiciously orange-colored powder that turned a glass of water into something vaguely citrus-flavored. Kids in the 1960s thought it was what astronauts drank in space, and that made it cool. Never mind the fact that it tasted like melted vitamin gummies mixed with sidewalk chalk. This was cutting-edge science in a cup. You would stir it in and watch it cloud up, like some kind of glowing chemical experiment. Parents told themselves it was fortified, but what it really fortified was the belief that flavor was optional. If you had Tang with toast, you know that was a bold pairing. Dry on dry, sugar on sugar. But that was the thing. Back then, meals did not always have to make sense. They just had to fill you up and keep the kids quiet before school. And if you ever double-dipped your toast into a glass of Tang because milk was out, then buckle up. Because we are about to enter the world of hot cereal that came with a mascot and a warning label. Bread scramble is pretty much one of those moments of sheer creativity, resourcefulness, and making the most out of things that just would never go together if you were adhering to common sense. It's a throw-together breakfast if I've ever seen one. I mean, you would honestly be hard-pressed to not call this survivalist cooking. It's exactly what you might think it is, too. Torn up pieces of bread that's either a day old at best or several at worst tossed up into a hot skillet. Add some butter and bacon grease, then scramble it up to high heaven with some eggs. People would typically add whatever scraps they could to make the meal stand out a bit more. They'd add leftover ham, onions, and different kinds of herbs, and flavor-wise, just think of it like a bread-based omelet. It actually soaks up a lot of the eggs and fat, so it's definitely a lot more flavorful than you would expect, and it gets the job done well enough from what is essentially a very impromptu breakfast. Probably end up with a nasty case of heartburn if you use this recipe regularly, though. Maple syrup toast with warmed butter was the farmhouse kitchen's answer to rushed mornings when breakfast still needed to feel comforting, even if the fridge was nearly bare. You would toast a slice of bread, slather on warm butter, and drizzle real maple syrup over the top. That was it. Sweet, buttery, and ready in under 10 minutes. Families loved it because it was practical, made from pantry staples, and good enough to carry you through a long morning of chores, school, or factory work. Some folks added cinnamon, others kept it plain, But either way, it turned toast into something that felt a little indulgent. You could find versions of this in old rural cookbooks, passed down through generations of families who knew how to stretch groceries without cutting corners on comfort. Somewhere along the way, breakfast like this disappeared under the weight of boxed cereals and fast food menus. But back then, it was one of those quiet meals that actually made mornings bearable. Funny how something so simple could be so easy to forget. Apple cinnamon baked porridge turned a simple pot of oats into a fragrant, oven-baked delight that fit perfectly with the 1960s fascination for make-ahead meals. Rolled oats were mixed with diced apples, milk, eggs, and a generous dash of cinnamon before being baked until the top turned golden and the fruit softened into sweet pockets of flavor. This dish could be prepared the night before and reheated in the morning, making it ideal for busy households looking to serve a nourishing breakfast without early morning fuss. The combination of whole grains and fresh fruit offered lasting energy and a natural sweetness that appealed to both adults and children. Many families served it with a drizzle of warm milk or a dollop of yogurt for added creaminess, while some sprinkled chopped walnuts on top for crunch. Apple cinnamon baked porridge became a quiet hero of the health-conscious 60s, proving that simple ingredients and slow baking could create a breakfast that was both comforting and forward-thinking. Fried salt pork with cornbread is a plateful of everything you like if you like bitter, salty tastes. Fat, frontier grit, and salt, this is the kind of food that made men out of boys. It's the kind of food that builds up muscle that isn't just for show, but the kind that gets railroads built. It's also the kind of food that people eat when they want to last through an especially aggressive winter. The salt pork gets heavily cured for preservation purposes, and it becomes streaked with fat. It's sliced into these thick strips and chunks, and then it's pan-fried until it's supremely crisp on the outside and really chewy in the middle. It tastes a bit like old bacon, especially the parts of it that are super salty and smoky. They have a very satisfying crunch, and they have a very lingering richness that just stays in your mouth. This is a combo that you would see a lot in the South and Appalachian regions, especially because salt pork was such an ideal way to preserve things. It is pretty much something everyone's grandparents have made at some point, despite now being something that's largely in the background. Sugar Smacks was not just cereal. It was barely cereal. It was more like candied puffs pretending to be nutritious, and somehow that was enough. If you remember pouring yourself a giant bowl of Sugar Smacks while your parents sat across from you sipping on straight black coffee, welcome to the Real Breakfast Club. The contrast was wild. You had a sugar explosion on one side of the table and bitter rocket fuel on the other. That was the vibe. Adults drank coffee because they were tired. Kids ate sugar cereal because it made the cartoons funnier. And sometimes, if your parents were really running behind, you would take a sip of their coffee out of curiosity and immediately regret it. No cream, no sugar, just punishment in a cup. But you would go back for more anyway, because somehow the bitterness of the coffee balanced the ridiculous sweetness of the cereal. It made you feel older, like you belonged at the big table. That was the thing about breakfast back then. It was a weird mix of indulgence and grit. And if you remember tearing through a box of Sugar Smacks while sipping burnt diner coffee from your dad's chipped mug, you are not just old, you are vintage. But not every cereal was sugary. Some were practically gravel. Johnny Cakes with sorghum syrup are just straight-up comfort food from a time when breakfast was this familial thing everybody looked forward to, and when breakfast was entirely made from scratch. Johnny Cakes are these rustic little cornmeal pancakes that are actually very no-nonsense. None of the fluff, flair, and aesthetic charm you would normally associate with pancakes. Do you know that super cozy vibe they give off? Just not there this time. Johnny Cakes are coarse, they're not the eBay when it comes to presentation, and they actually have this very deep, toasty corn flavor that pairs almost a little too well with the smokiness and richness of sorghum syrup. You can either use this in a dipping cup or drizzle it on top, but let's be real, the dipping cup is sacred. Anything else is blasphemy. Johnny Cakes also have something of a history that goes back all the way to the indigenous peoples. They were the first ones to teach colonists how you handle cornmeal and how you should cook with it, and they were made to mirror the effects of other popular survivalist Native American food, such as pemmican. Its main function was lasting on long journeys and providing you with a boost of energy to carry on with your travels. Sweet potato hash with onions brought bold color and natural nutrition to the breakfast table at a time when Americans were looking for hearty yet healthful alternatives to white potatoes. Cubes of sweet potato were pan-fried until caramelized and golden, mingling with soft sautéed onions that added sweetness and depth. The dish delivered vitamin-rich comfort with every bite while offering a lower glycemic twist on traditional hash browns. Many families seasoned the hash with paprika, black pepper, or a hint of cayenne for subtle spice, while others tossed in chopped bell peppers or fresh herbs for extra freshness. Served alongside poached eggs or a slice of whole-grain toast, sweet potato hash with onions satisfied appetites and brightened plates with its orange hue. Magazines and community cookbooks praised it as both budget-friendly and nutritionally forward, showing how simple vegetables could create a meal worthy of a Sunday brunch or an everyday breakfast that nourished body and spirit. Raisin Bran with warm milk and butter was the winter breakfast trick every frugal family knew when mornings were freezing, but there was still work to be done. You would pour bran flakes into a bowl, warm some milk on the stove, add a small scoop of butter, and pour it all over the cereal. Breakfast done in 10 minutes flat, warm, creamy, and filling enough to carry you through the morning. Families leaned on meals like this when groceries ran tight, but everyone still needed something hot and practical to start the day. It was sweet from the raisins, buttery from the milk, and surprisingly comforting for something so simple. You could find versions of this breakfast in old community cookbooks, homemaker guides, and those faded recipe cards tucked in kitchen drawers. Some folks sprinkled sugar, others added cinnamon, but it always came back to the same quiet goal: stretch a little food as far as you could and start the day with something warm. Funny how those simple breakfasts disappear when new trends roll in. Hardtack might sound like a pirate snack, and honestly, you wouldn't be wrong. This rock-hard cracker was a staple for soldiers, sailors, and settlers alike. Anyone who needed food that could last months or even years. Made simply from flour and water, hardtack was famously tough to chew, earning nicknames like tooth duller and molar breaker. But here's where things got clever. To make this bland biscuit remotely edible, people would soak it in water, milk, or even coffee to soften it up. Now add a generous smear of honey or syrup, and suddenly you've got a sweet treat that feels like a luxury in hard times. Back in the day, honey was nature's candy, and drizzling it over softened hardtack transformed survival food into a breakfast comfort. So why did it disappear? Well, once fresher options and modern preservation methods came along, hardtack lost its charm. Plus, people today aren't exactly thrilled about eating something that requires pre-soaking unless it's oatmeal. Supermarkets brimming with fluffy pastries and freshly baked bread have pushed this once practical dish into just a figment of history. Banana and wheat germ smoothies were the forgotten health food breakfast from the 1970s, back when nutrition guides promised energy in 10 minutes or less. You would blend a banana with milk, add a spoon of wheat germ, and maybe toss in honey if you had it. That was breakfast, quick, filling, and just trendy enough to feel like you were ahead of the curve. Parents loved it for being affordable, teens liked it for the simplicity, and health fads leaned hard on it as a protein-packed, no-fuss morning meal. It showed up in old diet books, homemaker columns, and those paper recipe handouts at grocery stores. Wheat germ was the health food of its time, promising fiber and nutrients without all the heavy cooking. Smoothies were new enough to feel exciting but easy enough to show up in every busy household. Somewhere along the way, this breakfast got lost behind flashy protein powders and complicated smoothie bowls, but back then, it quietly kept families full with nothing but fruit, milk, and a blender. Fresh berry compote over yogurt reflected the 1960s back-to-nature movement by showcasing fruit at its most vibrant and unprocessed. Fresh berries such as strawberries, blueberries, or blackberries were gently simmered with a splash of orange juice until they released their juices and formed a glossy, naturally sweet sauce. Spoonfuls of this warm compote were poured over chilled plain yogurt, creating a delightful contrast of temperatures and textures that felt both refreshing and indulgent. The dish delivered antioxidants, calcium, and natural sweetness without refined sugar, making it a popular choice for health-conscious families and a perfect finish to leisurely weekend breakfasts. Many cooks like to add a pinch of cinnamon or a few drops of vanilla extract to enhance the flavor, while some sprinkled homemade granola on top for a satisfying crunch. Fresh berry compote over yogurt proved that the simplest ingredients treated with care could create a breakfast that celebrated freshness and nourished the body and spirit. So fried cornmeal mush with syrup was this really golden, crispy edge throwback to times where meals like this counted as a wonderful breakfast. It was made from what was essentially just a chilled polenta, or otherwise known as cornmeal mush. You would slice these into thick slabs, pan-fry them until the outside was a complete crackling crust, and then the inside would stay really soft, dense, and creamy. Topping these with a bit of drizzle, sorghum and maple would complete the experience, and you would be enjoying a beautiful contrast of textures, flavors, and the crunchiness of it all. Cornmeal is a deeply hearty dish. It's something that sticks with you, and the nutty flavors help with that. This was a dish that was so common amongst Midwestern farm families and Southern homes throughout the 1800s and 1940s, and that was partially because cornmeal was so abundant that people just made up different versions of similar dishes. You will find it in old cookbooks, certain off-road diners that really try to stick to the whole mid-90s vibe, and Southern homes, but it's largely something that just doesn't get much traction anymore. Even still, cornmeal mush was amazing and deserves to have its name in the Hall of Fame of easy, convenient breakfasts you can rely on. Buttered saltine crackers with tea was not a snack. It was survival disguised as sophistication. You would take plain saltines, smear a bit of butter, or margarine if that is all you had, and pair it with a weak cup of tea. That was breakfast. No jam, no eggs, no sides, just crunch and steam. And somehow it worked. This was common in households where the bread ran out early and payday was still a few days away, but it did not feel like scraping the bottom. It felt intentional. A little quiet moment, sitting by the window with a tin of crackers and a chipped teacup. Sometimes, if you were lucky, the butter was soft. Other times it would tear the cracker in half and you would eat it in pieces. It was humble, yes, but not pitiful. That is the thing about old-school breakfasts. They stretched what little you had and made it count. Every bite was a memory. Every sip of lukewarm tea was a tiny reset button for the day ahead. But crackers were just the start. Some mornings, the real magic happened when last night's cornmeal was fried into gold. Fried cornbread batter is what it sounds like, to be honest. It's a cornbread mix that involves no eggs or sugar, and it's spooned right into a hot skillet and fried like a pancake. And some people actually prefer the term corn dodgers because of this. Although, my personal favorite is hoe cakes. It depends on the region, and it's the same idea. The hot and crispy golden discs of fried corn. Goodness you get are indescribably amazing and rich. Plus, inside they're really soft and crumbly, while on the outside, they have those perfectly browned edges that you just want with every single bite. This was minimalist Southern food. Well, as minimal as anything can ever be in the South. It didn't originate in typical Southern communities, though. This was a dish that came right out of African American traditions, and it was passed down through several generations because of how effective it was at keeping you full. These days, you don't really see fried cornbread batter anywhere except barbecue joints that try to pay respect to their vintage roots. But with a dish this easy, bringing it back wouldn't take any work at all. Peanut butter and honey milkshakes were the quick breakfast booster you would find in every 1960s teen handbook or homemaker guide promising energy in minutes. You would toss peanut butter, milk, and honey into a blender, give it a good mix, and breakfast was done before you could even finish your coffee. It sounds simple now, but back then it was practical, filling, and surprisingly satisfying. Parents loved it because it was affordable and kept teenagers full, and teenagers loved it because it tasted like dessert for breakfast. Some folks added ice or fruit if they had extra, but the basic recipe stayed the same. Peanut butter for protein, honey for sweetness, and milk to bring it all together. It showed up in old cookbooks, school lunch suggestions, and quick breakfast guides long before protein shakes and energy drinks filled grocery aisles. Somewhere along the way, it disappeared under the weight of modern trends, but back then, it was the kind of breakfast that quietly got families through rushed mornings with nothing but pantry staples and a blender. Ricotta and berry crepes brought a gentle European elegance to American mornings in the 1960s when home cooks looked for lighter ways to impress family or guests without heavy frying or sugary batters. Thin crepes were cooked in well-seasoned pans until just golden, then filled with creamy ricotta cheese lightly sweetened with a touch of honey and a squeeze of lemon for brightness. Fresh seasonal berries such as strawberries, raspberries, or blueberries added a vibrant burst of color and natural sweetness, creating a breakfast that felt fancy but was surprisingly simple to make in any modest kitchen. Many magazines of the decade praised this dish for its balance of protein and fruit, noting how it satisfied hunger while still feeling delicate and refined. Weekend brunch gatherings often featured these crepes as a centerpiece, offering a taste of continental sophistication without the need for expensive ingredients. Ricotta and berry crepes perfectly captured the optimistic spirit of the era, showing that health and indulgence could share the same plate and start the day on a graceful note. Ham and red-eye gravy is something that's considered a Southern classic. It has a really bold, salty personality, and it's a very no-nonsense flavor profile as well. This is a dish that takes country ham, which is typically dry-cured and goes the pan-frying route. The idea is to fry it until you see those dark brown edges crisping up in the pan. After that, you get an incredible flavor explosion in the form of concentrated pork drippings, and these then take a further unexpected turn. You start to pour in strong black coffee. Now I know you're about to fast forward 10 seconds, but hear me out, okay? The result isn't creamy or thick like you would expect. The coffee ends up deglazing the pan and it creates this super thin reddish-brown gravy that has an unmistakable sheen to it. The result is a punchy, smoky, and bitter-tasting gravy, but not overwhelmingly bitter, and the coffee cuts through a lot of the richness of the ham fat. This is something you would see so commonly among rail workers in Tennessee and Alabama, especially if it was in the afternoon hours. The caffeine really helped with the job. If you ever ate pie while standing in front of the fridge with a spoon and a guilty conscience, then welcome home. But not every shortcut was sweet. Some were warm, brown, and brewed from desperation. Postum was not coffee, it just looked like it was. For many families, it was the hot beverage of choice, especially when actual coffee was too expensive or frowned upon for kids. Made from roasted grains and molasses, Postum was marketed as the wholesome, caffeine-free alternative. And somehow people bought into that. You would stir a spoonful into hot water and try to convince yourself it tasted like something grown-ups would drink. It had this deep, earthy flavor that hovered somewhere between toasted bread and boiled pencil shavings. Not terrible, just different. And when paired with a piece of dry toast, it became a breakfast that felt oddly noble. You were not indulging. You were starting the day with restraint. Postum was the drink of war years, depression years, and anyone trying to avoid caffeine jitters. It was the beverage equivalent of "we make do." And if you sipped it from a chipped mug while flipping through the newspaper or stared out the window while steam fogged your glasses, then you get it. That kind of quiet breakfast was not rare. It was routine. But when even bread was running low, folks had to get creative with what they spread, or did not spread, on top. Goose grease toast is old-world decadence at its finest. It's a dish that isn't pretentious, overly fancy, or something it doesn't need to be. Instead, all you get is a crispy, rich, dripping flavor that comes at you like Trump tariffs towards China. This is also the kind of flavor you can pretty much obtain only from a long, slow-roasted bird, and the grease itself is something that's rendered from the fat of a goose. Typically, you get this from a holiday roast or a Sunday dinner. Once it gets cooled and strained, it becomes this ivory-colored fat that has a savory depth. It's a lot less saltier than you would expect a bacon fat dish to be either. It's more so rich and complex. If you spread this on hot toast, then the party really gets going. The dish melts into every pore of the bread, and it just becomes one of those meals that just blends flavors together. You know how you eat something and you can pick apart all the different things that are in there? That isn't the case with this dish. It's literally just something that all melts together into one individual, unique flavor, which is a really good statement about the quality of a dish. Historically, goose grease toast was definitely something new because it was introduced by immigrant communities, and people were a bit unsure. Once they tried it, though, they really got on the bandwagon. Goose grease toast is something that's really gone from American tables now, but they used to be something that got everyone seated at a table. Muesli-style cold cereal introduced a European influence to American kitchens during the 1960s, attracting health-minded eaters eager for something different from sugar-coated boxed cereals. Inspired by Swiss traditions, this breakfast featured raw rolled oats mixed with chopped nuts, dried fruit, and sometimes grated apple, all soaked in milk or yogurt overnight. The result was a cool, creamy bowl that delivered natural sweetness and a variety of textures without heavy sweeteners or artificial flavors. Dietitians praised its high fiber content and the slow-release energy that kept families full through busy mornings, a welcome contrast to the quick sugar rush of many commercial cereals. Home cooks often customized their blends, adding almonds, raisins, or sunflower seeds depending on what was available, which made it both economical and personal. Served chilled and often topped with fresh berries or a drizzle of honey, muesli-style cold cereal represented the adventurous side of 1960s breakfast culture, combining European elegance with practical American thrift in a single satisfying meal. Before butter became the reigning toast topper, our frugal forebears embraced something a bit more rustic like rendered animal fat smeared across toasted bread. Whether it was pork lard, beef tallow, or even goose fat, this golden spread was the original zero-waste culinary move. After frying up bacon or roasting meats, no one dared throw away the precious fat. Instead, they'd strain and save it, turning it into a savory, energy-packed breakfast boost. Some would sprinkle a pinch of salt, herbs, or if you were feeling fancy, even a touch of sugar to balance the richness. Back then, animal fat wasn't just a cooking byproduct. It was a prized resource, especially during lean times. For rural families and urban laborers alike, it provided essential calories to power through physically demanding days. But as refrigeration, vegetable oils, and dairy products became widespread, rendered fat slowly slid off the breakfast menu. Health trends also played a part. The low-fat craze of the late 20th century practically demonized it. Today, while foodies are rediscovering nose-to-tail cooking and chefs are reviving schmaltz and drippings for flavor-packed dishes, rendered fat on morning toast remains mostly a culinary ghost. Still, it's a fascinating reminder of a time when nothing went to waste, and breakfast was as much about survival as it was about satisfaction. Scrambled eggs with evaporated milk were one of those frugal breakfasts tucked inside old homemaker guides and church fundraisers from the 1940s through the 70s. The secret was canned milk. You would crack your eggs, whisk in a splash of evaporated milk, and fry them up fast. The milk made them fluffy, rich, and stretch further than plain eggs alone. This mattered more than people today might think. During wartime and lean grocery weeks, a can of evaporated milk was gold. It lasted longer than fresh milk, cost less, and made ordinary eggs feel like a treat. Some families tossed in herbs or cheese if they had extra, but most kept it plain. Soft eggs with just a little salt and pepper. Quick, simple, and done in under 10 minutes. You will not find this recipe on Instagram or in trendy brunch spots, but it kept families fed and mornings moving. People used what they had, made it work, and turned humble ingredients into something satisfying. Broiled tomatoes with Parmesan sprinkle transformed a simple garden staple into a warm, savory breakfast side that fit perfectly with the health-focused attitude of the 1960s. Ripe tomatoes were sliced in half, seasoned lightly, and broiled until their edges softened and juices bubbled, then topped with a delicate dusting of freshly grated Parmesan cheese for a gentle burst of salty richness. The quick cooking method preserved vitamins while concentrating the natural sweetness of the fruit, offering a nutrient-rich alternative to heavier breakfast meats. Many families served these broiled tomatoes alongside poached eggs or whole grain toast, finding the balance of flavors both refreshing and hearty. Food writers admired the dish for its elegance and simplicity, noting that even novice cooks could achieve impressive results in minutes. Broiled tomatoes with Parmesan sprinkle captured the essence of the decade's culinary goals by proving that a handful of wholesome ingredients and a few minutes under the broiler could create a memorable start to the day. Beef drippings on toast are the quintessential middle-aged dad breakfast, and I'm referring to a really specific kind of dad too. Beer belly, loaded forearms built over a career of a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, and the ability to fall asleep on a floor in jeans and eat literally anything. We all know the type. Beef drippings on toast were a breakfast that people largely made when they were low on materials for anything else. Toast is nice, but people have been hearing about it for literally centuries and, things just get old. People like to spice their toast up. It's only human. It's pretty much just what you would expect, too. Beef drippings are largely a byproduct of bacon and red meat cooking, and people like to scoop that up and preserve it as much as they could. You could pour it over beans, or just about anything, really. It was the kind of thing that would last you through several uncomfortable situations. Having to eat the same bland toast sounds pretty uncomfortable to me. It was also not as meaty or greasy as you would expect. It pretty much just tasted like your regular old beef. And this is what helped it to stay a consistent breakfast option throughout a lot of the 1950s and 1960s. Frozen waffles were not always trendy. In fact, in the 1970s, they were barely waffles. They came out stiff, pale, and freezer-burned, and you would shove them into a toaster and pray they did not come out still cold in the middle. Eggo waffles were a revolution, sure, but they were also kind of sad. They were not crisp unless you nearly burnt them, and they absorbed syrup like a sponge that had given up on life. But they were fast, and that was everything. Parents would toss one on a paper plate and call it breakfast. No whipped cream, no berries, just syrup, maybe margarine if it was payday. The commercials made them look like golden magic, but in real life, they were floppy, forgettable, and weirdly satisfying. If you remember struggling to butter a still frozen waffle, or watching one fly out of the toaster and land on the floor, you already know the deal. It was not gourmet, it was survival. And for kids of the 1970s and 1980s, this was the norm. But waffles were not the only thing you pulled from a box. Some breakfasts came in actual tin cans and were advertised like they had been launched from a cannon. Honestly, the fact that nobody is talking about how good molasses toast is these days is certifiably criminal behavior. I just want you to picture hot toast, and I mean real, genuine bread, not packaged, factory-made fluff, but actual freshly baked bread with deep, dark molasses. Not the generic stuff you find in marts and stores nowadays, but actual molasses. Blackstrap, bitter, smoky, sweet, and punchy. This is something brown sugar wishes it could be. Molasses toast is something that was definitely the moment back when it was popular, and those were times when you would consider sugar a luxury. Most folks tried to get it on everything they possibly could, whether that was biscuits, cornbread, hot milk, pies, or toast. The first person to put that stuff on toast hit a gold mine, and everybody copied the blueprint afterwards. The toast was absolutely the move, and butter melting with the molasses created this perfect harmony of sweetness. The bread was the perfect stage for that. And if you had it today, you'd feel like you're going back through time to a farmhouse kitchen in the 40s. You can eat this toast as it is or mix it up with some honey and nuts if you really feel like bringing out your inner chef. Some people also double down on the sugar rush by adding cinnamon and vanilla extract. Whole wheat buttermilk pancakes brought hearty goodness to the breakfast table when families wanted the comfort of pancakes without the heaviness of refined white flour. The 1960s saw a growing interest in whole grains, and cooks experimented with blending wheat flour into traditional batters to create a nutty flavor and a pleasant, earthy aroma. Buttermilk added tang and tenderness, ensuring each pancake was fluffy yet filling, a perfect canvas for fresh fruit or a drizzle of warm maple syrup. Many homemakers liked that these pancakes kept children satisfied well past lunchtime thanks to their higher fiber content, which was a talking point in health columns and women's magazines of the time. Recipes often suggested adding chopped apples, sliced bananas, or even sunflower seeds for a crunchy twist, while some adventurous cooks folded in a pinch of cinnamon for gentle spice. Whether served on a lazy Saturday morning or a busy weekday, whole wheat buttermilk pancakes reflected a forward-thinking spirit that embraced nutrition while honoring the familiar joy of a classic American breakfast stack. Stewed tomatoes on bread were something created out of thrift necessity, but they ended up being such a massive comfort food for the people that they stuck around. Tomatoes are often canned, right? That didn't used to be a thing until like the 60s, and that's why people really wanted to try out this new variant of tomatoes. They were slow-cooked, fresh with onion, butter, and bacon fat. Some people would go the extra mile, add a bit of sugar and salt, sometimes a hint of spice and vinegar, or take on a really rich and slightly sweet flavor. As these would tend to simmer, they would soften into this thick, chunky sauce that was kind of juicy but not really watery, and it had a really nice acidity to it. It helped that whatever flavors were there would cling really hard to the tomatoes. The simmering process would help them soften into this thick, chunky sauce too, and it went wild with white bread or cornbread. The bread was perfect for absorbing all of that up like a sponge, and that's what made this such a staple throughout the Depression and throughout a lot of the southern areas. Tomatoes are something that nobody ever really runs out of, and stewing them on bread is something that's a forgotten classic for getting through a hungry day. Hot Dr. Pepper was real. It was not a prank. It was not a joke. It was an actual breakfast drink, served warm, with a slice of lemon floating on top like it belonged there. In the 1960s and 1970s, the Dr. Pepper Company rolled out ads urging families to heat their soda in a saucepan and drink it like tea. And people did. They poured it into mugs, called it comforting, and sipped it alongside eggs and toast like this was totally normal. There was something oddly cozy about sipping soda that steamed like coffee, even if it tasted like fizzy syrup trying to be sophisticated. It was part science experiment, part nostalgia bomb. One sip, and you were either delighted or deeply confused. It smelled like caramelized chemicals and tasted like soda-flavored syrup with a citrus twist. Kids loved it, adults tolerated it, and on cold winter mornings, it hit the spot, mostly because you had no idea what else to serve. The lemon slice added a whiff of class, even though the whole idea screamed experimental chemistry. If you ever walked into a kitchen that smelled like a candy factory was melting, chances are someone had a pot of soda on the stove. And if that was your idea of a warm beverage, then you are probably still wondering why it disappeared. But hot soda was not the only strange liquid to hit the breakfast table. Some folks poured something even weirder into a glass and called it a meal. If your leftovers happen to be potatoes, mashed or otherwise, then potato cakes are your hero for today's Saturday dinner. Potato cakes are the ultimate leftover glow-up, and they're a fine example of how putting a little bit of faith, time, and creativity into what you think is nothing that special can actually result in a killer dish. Potato cakes are made from mashed potatoes that have been mixed with a generous bit of flour, egg, and then shaped into patties until they're golden brown. Just think of them like hash browns, or at least like a distant but more nostalgic and comfier cousin of hash browns. The flavor is what you would expect, but it's honestly more buttery than you would think too. You're really going to have the time of your life if your original mashed potatoes that are left over were made with cream or garlic mixed in, but even if they weren't, that's always a step you can add later. Potato cakes were the gift of several immigrant communities that were putting down roots during the 1800s and 1900s. This is a dish that's been shared among Irish, German, and Polish families, so everybody has their own take on it, and I know boxed mashed potatoes and freezer meals are what everyone goes for today. But this still beats all of that. Wheat germ and yogurt bowls were the health kick of the 1970s that snuck their way into forgotten cookbooks and quick breakfast guides. You would scoop some plain yogurt into a bowl, toss on a spoonful of wheat germ, maybe drizzle honey or sprinkle nuts if you had them, and breakfast was done in minutes. It was quick, packed with protein, and felt ahead of its time back when most breakfasts were still sugar-heavy cereals or toast. The health-conscious crowd loved it because it kept you full, parents liked it because it was easy, and even the kids got on board, mostly because the yogurt cut through the plain, nutty taste of wheat germ. These bowls were everywhere in the 70s, showing up in homemaker magazines, diet guides, and those community cookbooks with spiral bindings. But like a lot of forgotten breakfasts, they slipped away when trends shifted. Now it is all smoothie bowls and protein shakes. Molasses-sweetened oatmeal brought a deep, comforting flavor to breakfast bowls at a time when families were looking for hearty yet wholesome ways to start the day. Old-fashioned oats were simmered slowly in milk or water until creamy, then enriched with a spoonful of dark molasses that added iron, minerals, and a rich sweetness unlike refined sugar. The aroma of warm oats and molasses filled the kitchen, promising a meal that could sustain even the busiest mornings. Parents appreciated its low cost and high nutritional value, while children enjoyed its naturally caramel-like taste. Some households stirred in sliced bananas or chopped apples for extra texture, while others added a sprinkle of cinnamon to enhance the cozy flavor. Nutrition columns in mid-century newspapers often highlighted molasses for its trace minerals and its role as a natural sweetener that felt wholesome rather than indulgent. Molasses-sweetened oatmeal reflected the era's practical creativity, delivering warmth and energy without relying on processed ingredients, and became a trusted staple in countless American homes. Souse is a dish that actually shows you just how much resourcefulness the working class had back then. The nose-to-tail mentality of people was really something that persisted throughout several centuries before coming to a close leading up to the 2000s. This is a dish that was incredibly averse to being typical. It was one of those things that was different not because it wanted to be, or because it was trying to be, but because it just really had to be. The cooked meat was something that was chopped, mixed with different kinds of vinegar and spices, and suspended in a natural gelatin as it cooled down. Served cold, thick, and in delicate little slices, it had a punch that really helped to balance out the flavors of the pork, with a texture that will keep you stimulated throughout the whole meal. This is a dish that shows you all the different flavors the American South really has to offer. Scrapple was breakfast for the brave. It came in a brick, gray, speckled, and confusing to anyone who had not grown up with it. But for folks in Pennsylvania and parts of the Mid-Atlantic, this was a morning staple. Scrapple is what happens when you take pork scraps, cornmeal, flour, and spices, mash it into a loaf, and fry slices until they are crispy on the outside and soft on the inside. It is not pretty, it is not delicate, but it is undeniably part of American food history. You would eat it with eggs, or sometimes just on its own, maybe with ketchup or syrup, depending on how adventurous you were feeling. And it did what breakfast was supposed to do. It filled you up and kept you going. No fancy branding, no cartoon mascots, just a slab of meat mush and a hot skillet. It was Depression-era ingenuity at its tastiest, and if the smell of it frying in lard brings you back to a yellow-tinged kitchen with loud pans and louder parents, then you already know. But Scrapple was not the only strange slab to hit the table in those days. Some of them even came in boxes pretending to be cereal. Eggless pancakes. So the first time you hear that, you just automatically think that there's no real reason why these should exist, because what's next? Brickless buildings? But really, eggless pancakes have been around for far longer than you would think. This is especially true for lean periods like the Great Depression or wartime rationing in the 1940s, and a lot of eggs back then were actually decently more expensive than people could afford, or they just weren't available because somebody who could afford them likely scooped most of them up. COVID-era bulk buying wasn't really an isolated event, I guess. Most recipes would essentially just rely on baking powder for the fluff and use some kind of oil or milk along with flour. Old-school versions, and I mean proper vintage recipes, would even include mashed bananas, vinegar, and some applesauce, and that's some proper veganism if you ask me. Eggless pancakes have largely faded into the background now, but they were definitely one of the most affordable meals our grandparents grew up with back in the day. Egg salad on white bread, open-faced, was the speedy breakfast that showed up in every 1960s lunchroom and kitchen guide when mornings were short, but something filling still needed to hit the table. You would mash pre-boiled eggs with mayo, salt, and pepper, spread it on white bread, and serve it open-faced. That was breakfast, ready in under 10 minutes, practical, affordable, and good enough to carry you through the day. Families leaned on meals like this when groceries were limited, but eggs stretched far and filled hungry bellies. It was not fancy, but it was reliable, tucked into community cookbooks and school lunch guides that promised quick, no-fuss meals. Some folks added pickles or herbs, others kept it plain, but either way, it turned leftover eggs into something that worked fast. These days, it is rare to see egg salads show up outside of potlucks or picnics, but back then, it was a small, simple breakfast that actually stuck with you. Spinach and mushroom scramble turned a classic egg breakfast into a vibrant, vegetable-filled dish that matched the decade's growing interest in nutritious eating. Fresh spinach leaves were quickly wilted in a hot skillet, earthy mushrooms were sautéed until golden, and then beaten eggs were poured in to create a tender scramble flecked with greens. This hearty combination delivered iron, protein, and a savory depth of flavor that felt both rustic and sophisticated. Families appreciated that it required only a few simple ingredients while offering enough substance to keep everyone energized through school or work. Many homemakers added a small sprinkle of nutmeg or grated cheese to enhance the natural flavors, while health writers encouraged using olive oil instead of butter for a lighter touch. Served with a slice of whole grain toast or fresh fruit, the spinach and mushroom scramble quickly became a breakfast favorite for those who wanted something more exciting than plain eggs, but less indulgent than a rich omelet. It perfectly showcased how the 1960s embraced vegetables as stars of the morning table. Enough of all this savory stuff. Let's go towards something that's actually sweet. Believe it or not, people had incredible tricks and tips for that. One of those was a rice and molasses bowl, which is the kind of dish that just inspires gentle waves of nostalgia in you. It's something that's drizzled with thick, dark molasses. The molasses, which makes for a very bittersweet, smoky bite with sweet undertones, tends to seep into the grains. This actually gives them such a nice autumn-coated color that really just makes you want to set up your best sheet in a park, call a few friends, and enjoy the small things in life. Historically, though, this was nothing that was so romantic. It was a poor man's breakfast and dessert, especially in most parts of the South and the Appalachian regions. It was very common to see among working-class Northeasterns in the 18th century, and it was something that was relied on to stretch ingredients when things were running low. This is because molasses was always really cheap and bought in bulk, and if people weren't growing their rice, they were stocking up on as much as they could. Rice, molasses, and different kinds of bowls are now bygones of different times, but they were really good. If you have ever stood in front of a stove flipping cornmeal slices while the rest of the house was still dark, then you already know. This was comfort food with calluses. But sometimes, breakfast took a hard left turn into the bizarre, like when eggs were not enough. So you added ketchup. There is no middle ground with ketchup on scrambled eggs. You either grew up with it or you think it is culinary heresy. But for millions of American kids, especially in the 1950s and 1960s, it was just how breakfast worked. Eggs were cheap, ketchup was everywhere. Put the two together and you had a meal that felt familiar, even if it looked like something from a preschool food fight. This was not about haute cuisine, it was about speed and taste. Kids loved it because ketchup made everything taste like a hot dog. Parents loved it because it kept the complaining to a minimum. And let us be honest, these were not fluffy French omelets. These were dry, overcooked eggs tossed in a pan until they barely held together. The ketchup gave them life. It also gave them color, which was important in a decade where most food was beige. Some folks even added it to fried eggs or egg sandwiches, claiming it just worked. And if you still do it today, no judgment. Nostalgia is powerful stuff. But ketchup was not the only flavor booster in town. Sometimes, you needed something with a bit more iron. Turnip greens and cornmeal dumplings are a dish that confuses you. Is this survival food? Is this a nice little experiment with dumplings and vegetables? It feels like both. It was actually used in both ways too, so you would be pretty spot on with that assessment. See, people love to have fun with the things they did back then, even if those things were rooted in practicality and optimization. The turnip greens were something you simmered slowly, taking pleasure in the little things in life. You would absorb all the scents, fragrances, and aromas, and honestly, just doing that would kill most of your hunger. Plus, when they would get ready, they would turn silky and dark, and they had this really warm glisten to them. Swimming in a pot liquor broth that was abundant with pork fat, usually from a ham hock, it set the stage for an extremely soulful dish that knows what it's about. The cornmeal dumplings were then thrown into the pot, the perfect addition for something to revitalize your spirits. Soft spoonfuls of cornmeal dough would be mixed with bubbling greens, as they created a perfect Ghibli vibe for you to immerse yourself in. Historically, this is a dish that has been very common in Black and poor white communities. It's easy to romanticize today, but it is also a dish that's rooted in struggle, poverty, and making the most out of very little. Cucumber and dill cottage cheese cups embodied the cool, savory side of 1960s health food culture with a protein-packed dish that felt both refreshing and modern. Crisp cucumbers were diced and folded into creamy cottage cheese along with fresh dill, a squeeze of lemon juice, and a light sprinkling of black pepper for subtle zest. Served chilled in small cups or glass dishes, this combination delivered satisfying texture and bright herbal notes without heavy fats or refined ingredients. Magazines often highlighted it as an excellent option for weight-conscious readers seeking a filling breakfast or mid-morning snack that provided calcium and lean protein. Some home cooks added diced tomatoes or a touch of chive for extra color, while others paired it with whole-grain toast for a heartier meal. Cucumber and dill cottage cheese cups reflected the growing fascination with simple, natural flavors and made it easy to enjoy a light yet sustaining breakfast during warm summer mornings or busy weekdays without sacrificing satisfaction. Molasses milk with soda crackers. Sounds strange now, but for rural families and Depression-era kitchens, it was a fast, practical breakfast when the fridge was nearly bare. You would warm up some milk, stir in molasses for sweetness, and crumble soda crackers right on top. That was it. It was not fancy, but it filled you up, gave you a little energy, and made use of things that lasted forever in the pantry. Molasses was cheaper than sugar and packed with nutrients. Soda crackers were everywhere, and milk, fresh or canned, was always a breakfast staple. Old farm cookbooks, church recipe cards, and rural homemaker guides all had versions of this tucked inside, passed around by folks who knew how to stretch the simplest ingredients. It was humble, filling, and comforting in its own odd way. These days, it is almost unheard of, replaced by granola bars and cereal bowls. But back then, this quiet little breakfast got people through hard mornings with nothing but warm milk and a little ingenuity. Oatmeal water porridge is something that sounds like it's ripped right out of a Depression-era cookbook, but that's only because it really is. It was supposed to be this zero-wastage dish that would inspire people to make the most out of the least, but it didn't really go past poor farming communities and immigrant-dense areas. What it was good for was digestion, though, because this was insanely light on the stomach, while also being really filling. So the parents that did know about this would make it obsessively for their children, and back then, kids were a lot more cool about putting up with oatmeal. It was also perfect sick person food. Plus, even if none of that applied to a person back then, they'd still probably be living paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes oatmeal helps when it's not payday yet. The point being that everyone had a run-in with this at some point, but only a select few communities made a thing out of it regularly. Oatmeal water porridge is just oats simmered in plain water too, so it makes sense why it didn't go too far in the broader world. You don't have milk, sugar, or any extras here, and it was pretty much the definition of what you would call frugal. It was used in times when dairy was really unavailable and money just wasn't there, and texture-wise, it's a lot thinner than you can imagine. All that to say, it's likely not the most appealing bite. Tomato and herb omelet celebrated the fresh flavors of backyard gardens and farmers markets that became increasingly popular during the 1960s as more families embraced local produce. Eggs were whisked until light and airy, Then fold it around ripe tomatoes and fragrant herbs such as parsley, chives, or tarragon, creating a dish that looked as vibrant as it tasted. This omelet delivered plenty of protein and vitamins while allowing home cooks to highlight seasonal vegetables without spending extra money on expensive meats. The bright acidity of the tomatoes balanced beautifully with the soft texture of the eggs, and the aroma of herbs filled the kitchen with an inviting, savory scent. Some households added a sprinkle of mild cheese like Farmer cheese or Monterey Jack for a creamy touch, but many preferred the clean, vegetable-forward simplicity that felt new and healthy. Weekend brunches often featured this dish alongside fresh fruit or a slice of whole grain toast, making it a favorite for both family breakfasts and casual entertaining. Tomato and herb omelet embodied the decade's enthusiasm for wholesome meals that showcased natural flavors. Canned peaches over cottage cheese was the dish that blurred the line between breakfast and 1950s diet food. You would open a tin, let that sweet syrup drip, and gently plop a golden peach half on top of a scoop of cottage cheese. No cooking, no seasoning, just sweet and salty, soft and curdled. It was strangely elegant in a plastic plate sort of way. You might have seen it at church potlucks, cafeterias, or grandma's house, where the fridge always had a cold can ready to go. Cottage cheese was sold as a health food, high in protein, low in guilt. Peaches made it feel like a treat. Add a sprig of mint or a maraschino cherry, and you had something that vaguely resembled a sundae. It was also incredibly practical. No waste, no mess, and it looked prettier than it had any right to. But let us not pretend kids were lining up for it. This was adult breakfast, quiet, efficient, and undeniably retro. If you ever sat at the table pushing canned peaches around with your spoon while your parents read the paper, you are definitely part of a very specific club. But even this was nothing compared to the boldest fish-forward move of the morning. Milk toast is also pretty much exactly what you think it is. Back in the old days, it was so much more common for people to take an intentionally frugal approach to how they spent their food, and especially the kind of hacks, snacks, and dishes they would come up with. All of these ideas were centered around being able to make the most using the least amount of time, energy, and ingredients possible. Milk toast is one of the best examples of that because imagine if you tried to make the most out of some milk or some bread before it was about to hit those pearly gates and become fully expired. Yeah? You can't really figure out what to do because while you'd normally just eat them on their own separately, this time that doesn't work. You just go ahead and get milk toast ready. The best part is that it works in 3 different ways. You get a nice healthy meal that's a pretty good breakfast or an interlude meal before your next big meal. You get to save money because you're not letting anything go to waste, nor are you buying something new because these ingredients are probably on their last legs, and you get a pretty lovely dessert out of it too. What's not to like, really? It's kind of insane how convenient milk toast can really be. Cheddar grits with butter were the Southern kitchen's answer to rushed mornings when everyone still needed something hot and filling. Quick grits, a little butter, a handful of shredded cheese, and breakfast was done before you even finished your first cup of coffee. It was the kind of meal found in tattered cookbooks, handed down from grandmothers who knew how to stretch a pantry without cutting corners on comfort. These grits were creamy, cheesy, and surprisingly satisfying for something that took less than 10 minutes to whip up. You did not need fancy groceries or a stocked fridge, just the basics. It kept bellies full through school days, work shifts, or long hours in the fields. For a lot of folks, this was breakfast you ate standing up, spoon in hand, on your way out the door. Simple, cheap, and quietly comforting. Grits have stuck around in fancier forms, but this quick, everyday version has slipped through the cracks of modern cooking. Poached eggs on spinach English. Muffins offered a lighter, vegetable-rich cousin of eggs Florentine, perfect for families embracing wholesome trends of the 1960s. Fresh spinach leaves were quickly sautéed until just wilted, then piled onto toasted whole wheat English muffins that provided a nutty, hearty base. Perfectly poached eggs rested gently on top, their golden yolks ready to spill into the greens and bread below, creating a creamy sauce without the need for heavy hollandaise. This elegant yet simple breakfast supplied protein, iron, and vitamins, making it a favorite for health-conscious parents and a delight for anyone craving a satisfying but not overly rich meal. Many home cooks seasoned the dish with a pinch of nutmeg or a squeeze of lemon to brighten the flavor, while others served it with fresh fruit on the side. Poached eggs on spinach. English muffins captured the spirit of the decade's Back to Nature movement, proving that a balanced breakfast could also be beautiful and full of flavor. Rolled oats and bacon are a really humble and delicious combination. It does two things very perfectly. It balances the comfort of a cream-heavy dish with the allure of smoky flavors. Now, that's not very hard to do, but I think when a dish makes that work, it's always one for the Notes app. The oats are something you simmer slowly in water and milk. You know, the usual preparation. You have to wait until it becomes completely porridge, though. Stir in these crisp crumbles of bacon, and suddenly the dish transforms into a wonderful savory fantasy. You get to have this decadent texture with just the tiniest bits of smoky aftertaste, and it makes for a dish that just feels like the perfect autumn or winter breakfast. Historically, though, this is a dish that you would actually find more often in the summer times, when people were really trying to stretch out their meals and scraping for protein. Especially in the early 20th century, when rationing meant that almost everyone had to think conservatively about what they were eating and how much of it they were using. The savory oats bowl couldn't ever go mainstream, but I think that suits the quiet nature of the dish. Meatloaf with ketchup for breakfast was not a treat. It was a necessity. A cold, dense slab of last night's dinner, sliced and slapped onto a plate, or sandwiched between two slices of bread if you were running late. You might add more ketchup, you might not. It depended on your tolerance for dry meat and your level of morning optimism. Meatloaf was the ultimate leftover. It held its shape, kept its flavor, and was somehow better cold. Maybe because you did not have to smell it cooking again. Maybe because you were too tired to care. There was something rugged and unapologetic about it, like you were fueling up for a day of manual labor, even if you were just headed to school. It was the kind of breakfast that made you feel tough, even if it came wrapped in a napkin. But for many households, meatloaf breakfast meant you were not going hungry. It had protein, it had carbs, and it had a taste that clung to your mouth until lunch. Kids would groan, dads would nod approvingly, and moms would say, "There's food in the fridge," like that was the end of the conversation. If you ever ate meatloaf off a paper towel while staring at the microwave and trying to decide if it was worth heating up, then you know the drill. Tallow fried potatoes are the OG French fries. They're insanely flavorful. They have that beautiful golden sheen to them, and they're about as crispy as you would want the perfect batch of French fries to be. A lot of that color, vividness, and flavor comes from the fact that they're fried in rendered beef fat instead of vegetable oil. Now, back in the day, and I mean way before the 80s, fast food joints like McDonald's were actually using beef tallow in their fries as well. That was a big part of what gave them that original iconic flavor. Tallow helps potatoes achieve a savory flavor that they would never be able to get to on their own. Plus, this just isn't there today with the modern oils we have. The best part really was the exterior, because a simple first bite was about as close to nirvana as you could get. If you were eating these when you were borderline starving, then you were pretty much about to have the best food experience of your life. Tallow was the go-to frying fat for a lot of American diners and fast food kitchens, and it's just not hard to see why. And then, you ever have leftovers but you don't want to make what you had last night? Poached egg. Overstewed tomatoes was the kind of savory breakfast you would only find in old church cookbooks or handwritten recipe cards from a neighbor down the street. It was practical, filling, and ready in under 10 minutes, even if it sounded a little fancy. You would poach an egg, ladle some stewed tomatoes onto a plate, and serve it all with day-old biscuits or plain toast. The tomatoes were sweet and tangy, the egg added protein, and together they made breakfast that actually stuck with you through the morning. Families leaned on meals like this when money was tight and groceries were limited, especially during the Great Depression or lean years after the war. You did not need much: canned tomatoes, an egg, maybe some stale bread, and suddenly breakfast felt warm, filling, and just a little different than the usual toast. These meals disappeared as boxed cereals and frozen breakfasts took over, but back then it was one of the quiet ways people got through the morning with what little they had. Cranberry walnut yogurt. Parfaits brought a new sense of sophistication to the American breakfast table as yogurt emerged as a fashionable health food during the 1960s. Layers of tart cranberries, crunchy walnuts, and creamy plain yogurt created a colorful glass that looked as appealing as it tasted. The natural sweetness of the fruit balanced the tang of the yogurt, while the nuts added satisfying texture and plant-based protein, making it a filling yet refreshing option for busy mornings. Many homemakers prepared the components the night before, allowing the flavors to mingle and saving precious time before school or work. Food writers praised this parfait as a smart alternative to sugary cereals, and it quickly became a favorite at brunch gatherings where presentation mattered as much as taste. Variations included a drizzle of honey or a sprinkle of homemade granola, reflecting the era's creative spirit and interest in natural ingredients. Cranberry walnut yogurt. Parfaits captured the decade's blend of health consciousness and visual flair, turning an ordinary breakfast into a small celebration. Barley breakfast porridge is this incredibly wholesome dish with a supremely nutty flavor. So, it has this really satisfying texture that just feels like you're almost dipping your hooks into a custard, right? But it's also something that can be made to resemble kheer if you've ever had it. It can be made from hulled barley or pearl barley, but depending on which, you get an entirely different flavor merry-go-round. The combination is something that screams cottagecore. Historically, barley porridge really was a cottagecore too. It was a popular breakfast for people who were in rural areas, immigrant communities, and people who lived on the fringes of civilization, especially during winters, when barley was something that everybody was investing in, from the mountains to the cities. Barley breakfast porridge isn't something that's really all that common anymore. It's been overshadowed by oats, granola, and the convenience of all the pre-packaged instant cereals of today, but there's a place for it still. You can cause that comeback yourself by sharing your own take on the barley breakfast porridge. Grape Nuts was not a cereal. It was a challenge, a bowl of hard, crunchy nuggets that felt more like punishment than breakfast, unless you knew the trick. You had to soften them with hot water. That was the secret. Pour it in, let it sit, and wait. If you were impatient, you would regret it. Teeth were lost to Grape Nuts. It was dense, it was earthy, and it never pretended to be fun. But for a generation raised on rationing and stretching every dollar, Grape Nuts had value. It was filling. It was affordable. And it lasted forever in the pantry. You could mix in some sugar, a splash of milk, maybe a bit of cinnamon if you were feeling fancy. But most days, it was just water and hope. Kids today would call it cardboard. Back then, it was considered hearty. And the weird thing is, some people actually liked it that way. Especially when the weather was cold and the house was quiet, a warm bowl of Grape Nuts felt kind of grounding. Not exciting, not delicious, just real. But sometimes, when you were lucky or just ran out of options, breakfast came straight from the fridge and straight from dessert. Cold potato with an onion salad was basically the chic way to go vegetarian back then. The dish had a subtle charm that heavily relied on the texture and seasoning. It was also ideally served chilled, because, well, science. I'm just kidding, but basically, the starch starts to firm up. This gives the potato a much more dense and sometimes waxy bite that contrasts really well with the creamy dressings. It also works spectacularly with the flavors present in an onion salad, which honestly adds the perfect crunchy element. Cold potatoes can feel like a mush fest after a few bites, so having some alternative textures in there really helps smoothen everything along. Historically, cold potato and onion salad is something we likely derived from 18th century Europe. This is a pretty traditional recipe in German and French circles, and leftover boiled potatoes were always dressed in oil, vinegar, and herbs so that waste could be avoided. American potato salads are something that evolved from these traditions, and they gained a lot of popularity by the time of the 20th century as a potluck, picnic, and community dinner staple. Cottage cheese pancakes delivered a high-protein, low-fat twist on a beloved breakfast classic, perfectly matching the 1960s fascination with lighter, figure-friendly meals. Cottage cheese was blended directly into the batter, adding creaminess and a gentle tang, while reducing the need for extra butter or oil. The result was a tender pancake with a pleasantly rich flavor and a boost of calcium and protein that kept families satisfied well into the morning. Many home cooks served these pancakes with fresh berries or a drizzle of warm honey, while others paired them with a side of fruit compote for added color and natural sweetness. Nutrition writers often highlighted the recipe as a smart alternative to traditional flapjacks, and it became a favorite in health-conscious households across the country. Cottage cheese pancakes showed that a small shift in ingredients could transform a familiar dish into something both nourishing and exciting without sacrificing the comfort of a warm, homemade breakfast enjoyed around the kitchen table. Jelly roll-ups on white bread were the quick breakfast treat every kid from the 1950s to the 70s knew by heart. You would flatten a slice of white bread, spread on a little jam, roll it up tight, and slice it into pinwheels. Breakfast was done in under 10 minutes, fun to eat, and easy enough that even kids could make their own. Families leaned on meals like this when mornings were rushed, but you still needed something sweet to start the day. It was a trick you would find in lunchbox guides, homemaker columns, and those old spiral-bound cookbooks hiding in every kitchen drawer. Some folks added peanut butter, others kept it plain with jelly. But either way, it turned bread and jam into a quick, cheerful breakfast that actually stuck with you. Somewhere along the way, roll-ups disappeared under cereal boxes and toaster pastries. But back then, it was one of those small, forgotten meals that made mornings just a little brighter. Now, if you want to talk about something that's really underrated, it would be criminal to not mention hardtack crackers with honey. These bad boys are about the next best thing when toast just seems like an unlikely fantasy. Also, once 6-0 start pouring that honey on them, they become a completely different meal. Now, hardtacks are always something people have associated with tough times because, being totally real with you, very few people like eating these unless they have to. Everyone would rather prefer some kind of biscuit or actual crackers or just anything to do with cornmeal. But hey, that's what the honey is supposed to be for, and that's honestly what helps it stand out as a perfectly light meal to get your day started. When you're low on money, you can't really pick and choose much, but you can definitely experiment carefully with what you do have. What some people would do is throw them in a skillet and gently fry them with lard for a bit of extra flavor, but that always seemed like it didn't work with the coarse nature of hardtack. What about you? If you had nothing to eat but a tin of these, how are you spicing it up? Egg in a hole was the breakfast trick every old cookbook seemed to know. Simple enough to pull off in under 10 minutes, but special enough to feel fun. You would cut a hole in the center of a slice of bread, toss it in a buttered skillet, and crack an egg right into the gap. Toasted bread, fried egg, breakfast done, fast and filling with barely any cleanup. It showed up in kitchens from the 1930s through the 70s, always tucked between other quick, comforting recipes. Some folks called it toad in the hole, others sunshine toast. But it was always the same idea, a no-fuss breakfast for busy mornings. It used cheap ingredients most families already had and turned them into something that actually made the morning feel bearable. Kids loved it for the novelty, parents loved it for the speed, and nobody complained when breakfast showed up looking fun for once. It is one of those meals that quietly kept mornings moving, long before breakfast sandwiches and drive-through lines took over. Cottage cheese and peach plates became a cheerful staple in diners and home kitchens across America during the 1960s as people searched for figure-friendly breakfasts with a touch of elegance. Served cold on simple white plates, the combination of creamy cottage cheese and juicy sliced peaches offered a balance of protein, calcium, and natural sweetness that felt almost luxurious. Fresh peaches were ideal when in season, but canned peaches packed in light syrup made the dish accessible year-round, making it a favorite for mothers trying to provide a wholesome breakfast even in winter. Many diet magazines of the era promoted it as a high-protein, low-fat meal that could keep energy steady through a long morning without heavy starches or greasy sides. Some cooks added a sprinkle of cinnamon or a drizzle of local honey for extra flavor, while health-conscious diners often paired it with a small glass of tomato juice or herbal tea. This breakfast captured the optimism of the decade and the emerging desire for meals that nourished without weighing anyone down. Now, parsnip hash is a sweet, savory dish that boggle your mind. Because what really does parsnip hash entail? It's a sweet and savory skillet dish that smells a lot like summer and tastes like something that just came out of a wood-fired stove. Parsnips were diced, fried, and they turned golden at the edges. The idea was to caramelize them until they were just about to be overcooked, because there's this really specific sweet spot between overcooked and just typically caramelized where the flavor gets super concentrated. The end result was a nutty, peppery, and sweet dish that was honestly to die for. If you're looking for something healthy to add to your diet, this is also a wonderful option. And historically speaking, it's always been something people ate throughout the winter to keep their health strong, their immune system locked in, and their bellies full. Some people definitely prefer things completely vegetarian, and this is a pretty amazing way to go about it. If you're looking for some inspiration for your meal plan, then there's no better or healthier dish to start out with than turnip hash. Also, if you do end up trying this, you absolutely have to share the experience in the comments. I'm low-key dying to know what turnip hash is like. Cornbread in buttermilk in a glass. No plate, no fork, just crumble, pour, and drink. Or scoop it with a spoon, depending on your texture tolerance. This was rural breakfast science at its finest. A Southern tradition that turned dry, leftover cornbread into something hearty, tangy, and oddly refreshing. The cornbread, ideally a bit stale, would be broken into chunks and tossed into a tall glass. Then came the buttermilk, thick, sour, and ice-cold. It was a weird blend of creamy, sour, and gritty, but to those who grew up on it, it was comfort in a cup. It filled you up, cooled you down, and somehow made you feel like you were doing something right. Some people added salt, others stirred in sugar. But most just left it as is, letting the bread absorb the buttermilk until it became a chunky, tangy porridge. It sounds bizarre until you try it. And if you grew up in a house where cornbread was made in cast iron and buttermilk was always in the fridge, this dish was second nature. It was not glamorous, but it was filling and cheap. It got you through the day and made use of every crumb. If you ever watched someone eat this and thought, maybe, you are not alone. And if you actually liked it, then welcome to the secret club. But if soggy bread drinks are not your thing, how about cereal with a twist only the brave attempted? Let's talk cracklin' cornbread. This is the cornbread that absolutely doesn't mess around. Like, this is the supersonic of cornbread. This is that rugged, crispy-edged cousin of your typical cornbread muffin, and it brings with it all the rustic charm that cornbread is always known for. Cracklin' cornbread has always come from the innovative kitchens of the working class, and this is especially true in the South, where using anything less than all of the hog was considered culinary blasphemy. Wasting fat? You may as well hang up your butcher knife. It was about no waste, and cracklins were a prime example of why that mentality worked. These were gold, and stirring them into cornbread only made them shine brighter. It made the bread a lot more filling and gave it extra protein, and you needed that because if you were coming back from a day of shoveling mud, then you definitely needed something for those muscles. It was a proper lunch though, and it was even better with some fresh greens on the side. Cracklin' cornbread is something that pretty much has faded into the background nowadays, but it was the perfect kind of thing for when you had nothing but a skillet, an empty stomach, and a lot of grit and determination to make something worth eating. It's a 10 out of 10 for a lot of Southerners, and nothing's really changing that. Cream cheese and jelly sandwiches were one of those quiet kitchen tricks passed down from old homemaker guides, perfect for rushed mornings when the fridge looked bare, but breakfast still had to happen. You would take soft white bread, spread on a swipe of cream cheese, and finish it off with grape jelly or whatever jam was on hand. That was it. Served cold or lightly toasted, it was fast, sweet, and filling enough to count. For a lot of families, this sandwich was a saving grace on mornings when eggs were too expensive and cereal boxes were empty. Cream cheese made it creamy, the jelly brought the sweetness, and together they turned plain bread into something that actually stuck with you through the morning. You could find versions of this recipe in old community cookbooks, lunchbox ideas, and school pamphlets reminding parents how to keep breakfast simple. Somewhere along the way, it got pushed aside by granola bars and frozen breakfast sandwiches, but back then, it was a 10-minute meal that worked every time. Funny how those easy, no-fuss breakfasts slipped through the cracks. Avocado toast on rye was ahead of its time, a California trend that hinted at the future of healthy breakfasts long before it became fashionable nationwide. During the 1960s, avocados gained popularity in coastal markets, celebrated for their creamy texture and heart-healthy oils at a time when Americans we are beginning to think seriously about nutrition. Ripe avocados were lightly mashed with a squeeze of lemon juice and a pinch of sea salt, then spread generously over hearty rye bread toasted until crisp, creating a satisfying blend of crunch and smooth richness. Some adventurous cooks sprinkled fresh herbs or a drizzle of olive oil, while others topped it with sliced radishes for a subtle peppery kick. The combination delivered fiber, vitamins, and lasting energy, making it an instant favorite among health-conscious families and young professionals. This simple yet elegant toast represented a forward-looking approach to breakfast, demonstrating that a few wholesome ingredients could create a memorable meal with both style and substance in a changing culinary landscape. Which forgotten breakfast would you wake up early to make? Share your grandparents' morning traditions in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another taste of how America used to start the day.